Hi, welcome to Consciously Unbiased LinkedIn Live. Today we have a very exciting topic with called How to Close the Black Wealth Gap with special guests, Nihal Mehta, founding partner of ENIAC Ventures, Yemi Rose, CEO of Color, and Lucy Marcil, Associate Director of Economic Mobility Center for Urban Child and Health Family. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to start off with a question about who you guys are and what you do. So Nihal, would you like to start?
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Nihal. Thanks for tuning in. I have been an entrepreneur, I guess, at the beginning of my career, about 25 years ago. Started 5 startups. A lot of them failed, so got a lot of muscle memory and scar tissue from those experiences. Then started investing off some of those successes and co-founded a venture firm called ENIAC Ventures. ENIAC is based in, well, pre-pandemic, we were based in New York and San Francisco. And we lead seed rounds. So we're writing kind of $1 million to $2 million checks in founders that are building big disruptive companies. In our spare time, we obviously put a lot of energy into social justice issues and politics as well. So happy to get into that later.
Welcome. Yemi, you want to go next?
Yeah, I mean, tough to follow. My name is Yemi Rose, or as Ash calls me, Yemi Rose. I'm the founder of Color. First, second time entrepreneur, really, I guess. Of Color is a fintech platform that's launching in the fall that's really solely focused on closing the racial wealth gap. We're starting with enterprise solutions and building tools based around how people of color spend and save and build our legacies differently. The goal is really not to just narrow the racial wealth gap, but to ultimately close it. I've spent a good chunk of my career in financial services at some of the top companies in the States, most recently as Vice President of Financial Wellness Enterprise Initiatives at Prudential Financial's GC team.
Welcome. And Lucy?
Sure. Hi, I'm Lucy Marcil. I wear a few different hats. I'm the co-founder and executive director of StreetCred, which is a startup providing clinician services for families at the doctor's office. We're based out of Boston at Boston Medical Center. I'm also a pediatrician, and in that role, I'm the associate director for economic mobility, which is just a mouthful to say that we're trying to figure out how to help families build wealth to improve their health.
Okay, great, welcome. So let's talk about the black wealth gap. The data shows that the median household income for whites is 10 times greater than blacks. So basically 171,000 versus 17,000. Can you share some of the underlying causes behind the gaps and what your thoughts are on that?
I can jump in. Yeah, it really depends on how far back you want to go, right? So it obviously starts with slavery, the transfer of black value through labor without compensation, and then the racist backlash against black progress during the Reconstruction. We can go back to the broken promises of the Freedmen's Bank. For those who aren't familiar, Freedmen's Bank was opened in 1865 as a savings bank for people of color that was seemingly or perceived to be backed by the federal government, but wasn't. And we lost 75 million in black wealth, the equivalent of $1.5 billion today. We see it during Jim Crow where black folk were sometimes even denied insurance products because we were perceived to be inferior. And then, famously, the government social welfare programs following the Great Depression, through FHA and GI Bill, that essentially built a strong white middle class and relegated people of color to an underclass. And then, we all experienced it again during the Great Recession, with Blacks and Latinos essentially 2 to 3 times as likely to be denied loans. And then when they got them, they were usury and subprime. And then we don't even have to go, we can look as far back as last month, right? I personally believe the gap is significantly increasing right now with COVID. We're seeing crazy numbers for Black unemployment, and we see it with the invisibility of small businesses of color with the SBA PPP allocations. So we're probably not going to know the scale of that for some time. It took us some time to uncover what was happening during the Great Recessions, but there are tons and tons of examples, unfortunately, of large-scale exploitation. It's kind of led us to where we are today.
The other, piece I would add to that is a lot of my work is in tax, and the way our tax policies are structured really exacerbates some of those disparities that Amy is talking about. For instance, you are, if you're high income, you're given tax benefits if you save in certain types of accounts, 401ks, 529s, but those same benefits are not really beneficial to low-income families. So if you save in a 529 and you don't have enough dividends or capital gains to really owe taxes, then there's really no tax incentive there. So we're actually furthering that gap by helping people with tax benefits who don't necessarily need that help.
Yeah, and some of our kind of just research and learning, obviously, as Yemi mentioned, it goes back, hundreds of years. I think, in this country, largely Black folks were not able to, generate wealth and retain wealth, at a high level. There's a lot of folks that have said the goalposts keep, quote unquote, getting moved. And whether it's, when this country gave land to folks, they were white folks. And even now in a lot of the new burgeoning industries, like cannabis, for example, actually Hassan Minhaj had a great episode on this a couple months ago. It's interesting that like 80% of the entrepreneurs that are given the licenses are white, right? And so anyway, in all these new industries, burgeoning industries, it's been extraordinarily challenging, I think. And that's one of the things that we've been studying. And I know for us in technology and venture capital, that's definitely, a very similar sentiment, that it's been very hard for, in general, underrepresented founders to break through, that this network in particular is very siloed. And so that's one of the things that we're actively trying to work on.
Yeah, if I just jump in there for a sec. Those are two really good examples of contributing factors, right? You look at entrepreneurship and the ability for entrepreneurs of color to even acquire VC funding to get their foot in the door. Lucy talked about the tax implications and essentially how people of color tend to extend credit so much to everyone, including the government, which they get back in the form of a refund, but don't get credit in return. But if you look at some of the new research, I think the Cleveland Fed last year had a great paper looking at examining the racial wealth gap and looking at the contributions to the variance in it and the durability of it. The major factor that sustains it today is income. It's the inability to have sustained high enough income. And there are ways that entrepreneurship can change this. There are ways that government tax policy can change this. But what we really, really need is we need, large government programs that provide credit to people of color, small businesses of color, credit to individuals of color, and policies that encourage and support corporations that hire individuals of color, and transparency in how we're paid.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I think like if you look at how we perceive things, right? A tax credit or a tax cut, if I was going to build a building in New York City, that's considered a tax cut, right? And it's not considered charity. And the reality is, because it's create jobs. But if I'm going to give you money to survive and money to work or money to train you, that's considered charity, right? And I think they're both charities. If you want to look at it that way, they're both credits to create jobs. And so I think that's something we have to kind of reposition. In terms of credit, like what types of credit do people have? Lucy, what types of credits do people have that are not being acknowledged? And then secondly, I'll give you an example. When I was in college, I got a credit card, right? And I thought this is free money. And then I didn't realize I had to pay the bill. And then I went to my parents to help me pay the bill. But if I didn't have...
Have you paid that bill yet, by the way?
Yeah. But if I didn't have my parents to help me bail me out on that, it would have messed up my credit for 10 years, right? And so that basically creates structural issues from day one on how to get people out of this economic disparity.
Right. And there are some good products that are coming out now where, like, for instance, with credit cards, there are ones you can get that you preload. You can't go over the balance. That can help you build your credit. But to your point, if people don't know about that, and if they're signing up for credit cards that have high balances they can't pay off, then that is setting them up for failure. And I definitely, with my patients, see a lot of teenagers and adults no one's ever told them that. The only reason I knew that in college was because my sister told me how it worked. And so that's further perpetuating these equities, and is obviously something, the financial industry could take on. It's not that complicated to try to say, like, let's empower teenagers with this knowledge.
Yeah, Lucy, you mentioned something interesting that it's almost like, some communities never kind of got, quote unquote, the memo, right? And I actually just read a book. John Bryan Hope has a book called The Memo, and it's literally about talking about the disparity in specifically wealth and equity. Literally, communities getting the memo and some just having no clue about the memo.
Right.
And,
sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's really important to point out there, which I think you're getting at too, is that those communities have been intentionally excluded. So it's not an individual failing of any families. I talk to a lot of young moms who say, like, oh, my parents didn't teach me this, and now I have all this. But others who really did get taught that. But I think it could be easy to kind of blame the individual or the family. But really, if we zoom back to all those historical factors Ian was talking about, it's because we as a society have structured it that way.
Yeah, and look, when we're talking about retail credit, it's important to also understand that, people of color are going to spend way more on every single type of credit product. You just look it up. Every single type of credit, whether it is retail credit, whether it's their mortgages, anything, we pay higher rates across the board for. And there's something structurally wrong when that happens. My view is that, financial services companies, for the most part, are going to do what financial companies do, and that is, use capital to create more capital. And it's easy to place blame on them, but they've been put in a situation, one, where through government policies, they're essentially fighting a lot of them are fighting to survive. And they're being given free rein to accumulate credit and to basically accumulate profit. So that's what they're going to do. My personal view is that we need a totally separate system that is outside of financial services. Derek Hamilton out of Ohio State is a huge proponent of the postal banking, using the postal banking system to provide that kind of credit. Using the postal service to provide postal banking services. And that's something that's done by almost every developed country in the world outside of the United States. And it's something that we have done. We've done that in the past. We had postal banking in this country. I might get the year wrong, but I think it's up to 1968. We had postal savings. So it's something we've done before and something we can do right now, and it's something that would be outside of a financial services industry that's incentivized to frankly seek out customers that will be the most profitable. And unfortunately, for many of them, it costs them way more to sustain, say, even a bank account for a low-income client than it is a high-income client. It costs them the same, but the margins are higher in the higher-income client.
Yeah.
Can you speak about what your organization does? Because I think it's really fascinating. It will kind of help bridge the gap
Yeah,
there.
so we try to tackle it on three fronts, right? One is that we work with corporations through what's called enterprise financial wellness services, offering them personal financial management, offering their employees personal financial management tools, and basically fintech products to help to assess where they are in their financial lives. The next step is to patch holes, right? So I talked a bit about people of credit, people of color essentially spending more for all types of credit products. Sometimes they don't even have the privilege of doing so because there are 35% fewer financial institutions in neighborhoods of color. So our focus in the second stage is to patch the holes and to essentially get rid of the need for check cashing, for example, get rid of the need for the use of payday lending services. And we do that through earned wage access solutions, which is kind of the second tier for us. The final tier is really advocacy, which, we are essentially trying to get together a membership coalition that can function in a similar way to AARP, but focused on economic justice for people of color. So essentially using our collective strength to have fintech organizations sign on to essentially a Bill of Rights that guarantees non-exploitive products for people of color.
Great. No, you're putting together a group, and I always love the things that you do because individual behavior can actually help scale, right? And so you're putting together a coalition around making commitments on helping raise this community. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, we're actually launching. So it's interesting, at least in our industry, tech, venture capital, entrepreneurship in general. I think, after George Floyd 2 months ago, a lot of folks spoke out, specifically the inequity in our industry. And there are a lot of pledges that were being created. And so a lot of incredible firms and entrepreneurs pledged to, hashtag hire or wire, for example, more Black entrepreneurs and Black VCs. And what's interesting about these pledges, and we kind of saw this even when BLM started, Trayvon Martin and, many years ago, is that a lot of these things became little blips, right? And by the way, the media cycles are so crazy these days that it's hard for any attention to be sustained. We have the most important election of our lives, in less than 90 days. And so folks are definitely, attention is really hard to capture. So anyway, a lot of these pledges were created, and they're fragmented. They're kind of living all over the place, and maybe it lives on somebody's blog or somebody's Twitter, but there's not one place that I think everybody can publicly see these pledges, and also hold the folks that are making pledges accountable for success, right? Because I think that's the most important thing. People pledge things and then obviously they don't follow through, or their attention is shifted. Yeah. So anyway, we're launching a project in the upcoming weeks called the 100K Pledge, which serves two purposes. One, it's a social public record of all of these pledges and specifically aggregating the existing pledges that exist. By the way, if anybody knows how to get to Michael Jordan, we're trying to get his epic $100 million pledge over the next 10 years, on the platform. So that's one purpose, to aggregate all these disparate, fragmented pledges. And the other mission is to help folks create pledges. So literally, people that want to do something, they don't know what to do. They can come to our site and they can basically pledge a minimum of 100K over 10 years. So $10,000 a year, and you can do whatever you want. You can hire, wire, donate, invest. So anyway, we're kind of facilitating the creation and aggregation of these pledges. And the idea is, can we aggregate a grand total of economic empowerment that people have committed to? And it doesn't take that many folks, 10,000 people at 100K over 10 years, you're already at a billion in economic empowerment. And so if we can aggregate billions, then I think that's significant, and it's an accountable social public record. The new type of philanthropy, kind of in the vein of Jack Dorsey, et cetera, is to be so transparent that literally you have a Google Doc, on your Twitter page that crashes like every 5 days because everybody's looking at it, like where are you putting your money? But that is the new gold standard. And so we're kind of porting that to be this aggregator of economic empowerment pledges to the Black community. So that it's called the 100K pledge. Look out for it in the next few weeks.
Great. Lucy, you talk about economic mobility. Can you kind of explain that, and also how early life experiences affect the wealth gap and mobility?
Yeah, sure. I mean, big topic. So I guess briefly I can say that the work we do specifically, so we help people file taxes to get all of their tax credits. We also make sure that they are opening 529 accounts, often which have cash incentives from the government to open. And then you offer financial coaching through certified financial planners as well, because there is a component of both financial literacy, but also, for all of us, behavior change and working with someone who can help tap into what your goals and motivations are to help you make those changes. But at the same time, we're very much aware that none of those things are adequate to create true economic mobility if our systems don't change. So a lot of the work that we do is also focused on taking our experience on the ground with clients and families and sharing it with policymakers, as well as in forums like these to help push the conversation. So, we need to need more economic opportunities for jobs. In Boston Medical Center, we are also working on Boston Medical Center is a part of the Healthcare Anchor Network, which is a national idea that hospitals are huge drivers of economic power in communities. And so we can use our economic power for community development. We can use to hire people from our communities so that they have well-paying jobs. It doesn't have to just be a theater of healthcare. So there are a lot of different ways that we do it, but kind of getting back to what Amy was saying around, in neighborhoods of color, there aren't a lot of financial institutions. The flip side of that is true too. In neighborhoods of color, there are a disproportionate number of, for-profit tax preparers. And so that's how we really got started, is thinking this is a way to get cash back in people's pockets. If we do a tax return at a place that's convenient, so you have to come here anyway for your kids' checkup, we can do your tax return at the same time. You'll get, on average this year, our clients got $3,000. So, that makes a huge difference in your your kid. And then have mental bandwidth to think about how do I get a better job and not just worry about the tomorrow.
Why do you guys think the unemployment rate is so much higher for Blacks versus whites?
In general or right now?
Right now.
Well, so we know that people of color are typically last in and first out when it comes to unemployment in general during regular times. People of color generally make up a higher percentage of wage workers and are more likely to be hurt by a shutdown or a slowdown in hours. Black businesses are also closing at a much higher rate. If you look at PPP specifically, only 10% of the minority businesses that applied for PPP got, and I think the average amount was less than $20,000. I think school closings early in the crisis hit Black and brown communities particularly hard, as many depend on schools for not only childcare but for meal prep. So I think there are a number of factors involved. The connective tissue between all of them would obviously be the structural biases that have placed us in this position in the first place.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I would add to that, especially around the childcare issues, I see this all the time with my families, is that, like Amy said, they don't have school anymore. A lot of them daycares have closed, but then they're reopening and they're coming to us saying, like, should I send my kids back? And they're terrified because they're the same communities who are experiencing much higher infection rates. And so there's a real risk to them. If my sister sends her kids to school, probably they'll be fine because she lives in a suburban white community. But if my patients send their kids to school, there's a really good risk that they're going to have transmission of infection, and they live in more multi-generational households and have particularly death of family members. And so then people are choosing to stay home, but it's not really a choice in a way because
Yeah.
they want their family members to die, and that's really reasonable.
Yeah, we talked about for a while blackness as a comorbidity factor, and there's no black gene, right? It's a social convention, obviously. So then, what is the intervening variable here? And it's money, frankly. People of color will tend to live in communities where we're closer together. We are frontline workers. Maybe not in the sense that we are at the hospitals, but we are frontline workers in that we are cashing your groceries. So it's really poverty, and it's poverty that was created by flawed government policy, and that can potentially only be alleviated by restrictive. With government policy that can restore equity as opposed to just focusing on equality.
There was this great The Daily New York Times episode maybe 6 weeks ago, and it actually talked about why blacks were getting infected at a much higher rate. And, adding on to those points that, Lucy and Yemi just mentioned, they also, talked about just racism, systemic racism in hospitals, and unfortunately patients, black folks that come in are treated very differently with a different standard of care, across the country. And that actually, they claim, contributed to that. And the other thing that was really surprising was they talk about just in general, the weathering of racism and how that actually has literally an immune system response, and it's lowered the immune system of many in the black community just because they've had to deal with this, so significantly throughout their lives. And I didn't even think about those as reasons of the disproportionate rate of infection, but I thought that was super interesting.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I hadn't heard that. I'd heard about the disparate treatment, especially for Black women. I mean, Black women, God bless them, because honestly, it's I talk about Black suffering in general, but I don't think anyone suffers more than a Black woman. And have that suffering not recognized both emotionally and literally in the context of hospitalization, where Black women's pain is often kind of ignored. But it's interesting. I never thought of just the fact of living in a Black body on a day-to-day basis impacting your levels of immunity to disease. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Through recessions, we kind of find that the rich kind of get richer, the poor get poorer. And if you think about what organizations and large corporations can do, there's this thing that came out in the 60s called supplier diversity, right? And it was to try to equal minority business owners with white business owners and sort of level the playing field. But I think what happens when and we're not really thinking about this during a recession, is there's a lot of pressure for companies to save on dollars. And they push procurement to reduce their vendor footprint and actually put more revenue through a larger vendor so they can actually get bigger price discounts. And so I think that's something that has the opposite effect of what we really want to do today, right? And so what are some things that you guys think organizations could do to sort of level the playing field, bridge the gap, and also increase hiring in that area? Are there any recommendations you guys have?
I mean, I think one really simple thing, which I just mentioned, but I think it's worth repeating, is every single person who makes hiring decisions can be really explicit about hiring people of color. If I've talked to plenty of white colleagues who are well-intentioned and say like, oh, we tried to interview all these people, but at the end of the day, like, we didn't get any candidates. Well, maybe you're not advertising your job in the right place. And so some of it is about setting a standard or a goal, and it may, just hiring is one example, but and then actually figuring out like, how can I get to that goal, not just who can get there.
Yeah, I think corporations have a definitely have a role to play, and we're working with corporations, and we're working with enterprises to try and correct what we're seeing. But look, we talk about it as a gap, and I've spoken about this quite a few times before. It is a massive chasm. I mean, for every $100 in white wealth, blacks hold $10. That is not something that simple supplier practices or hiring practices is going to change. I mean, flawed government policy got us here, and flawed government policies needed, and proper government policies needed to get us out of here. If we've not historically had the will to focus on, or to follow through on effective policy focused on equity. We saw running up to Reagan, after the signing of the Civil Rights Act, there were policies that were put in place that essentially, after 15 years, we lost the political will to follow through. So we need policy to root out the structural inequities, but we also need the situation to be remedied. So we need policies to focus on equity as opposed to equality. Next, we talk about the infrastructure. I mentioned postal banking a couple of times. I think that's something that needs to be implemented. Additionally, look, we couldn't. 10 years ago, you couldn't talk about reparations in polite company. I think now, finally, that's a conversation that is actually being had, and we're recognizing that this is not something that is so far out of the mainstream. We have countries around the world that are exploring and implementing these policies, and it doesn't have to necessarily be helicopter money, but it could be in economic incentives. The supplier diversity is one of them, but way larger than that. That prioritize and prioritize people of color and look to correct the inequity. And then finally, people. Have a lot of faith in the current generation that's coming up. I'm gonna destroy the Barry Goldwater quote, but Barry Goldwater said something like, "No matter how hard we try, we can't make people like each other." I think the generation that's coming behind us is a little bit more, a little, frankly, less racist. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, that's great. Nahal, what do you think is going to happen? Like, do you think the VC community is really going to step forward and really make an active effort to fund Black entrepreneurs? And how do they maintain that to make sure it actually happens?
Yeah, it's happening. I mean, it's got to start at the top, right? Folks trust and invest in people that look like them. And by the way, that's why there's a number of, female founders are dramatically underrepresented as well in venture, because let's be honest, it's all a bunch of white dudes, right? And in venture, it's still, I think, 80% or something, which is crazy. So one of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to also make sure Black underrepresented in general get funded as GPs, right? So there's more venture firms of Black partners and female partners specifically. Because when you can start at the top, then you're automatically going to have more founders, right? That are underrepresented as well. And so personally, we've done, I don't know, maybe almost a dozen investments in funds that and also help fundraise for underrepresented GPs, because I think the more of these firms that are out there, the quicker you're going to get more and more diversity in this industry. But by the way, the GP is not even at the top of the food chain, right? It's the LP. So I mentioned as a small check, we can write those, but the big LPs, folks like the endowments, Yale and Princeton and Harvard, the pension funds, the foundations, that's where change really has to happen. And we're honestly starting to see that. There's incredible LPs like the Ford Foundation and Fairview that actually are run by incredible, Black men. They're the ones that are investing in funds. They have diversity mandates. They want to make sure that their managers have, call it 50% diversity. And when that happens, then there's a trickle-down effect where the portfolios look very diverse. So I think you really got to start from the top, and follow kind of the money chain down. But we are definitely seeing change. I mean, there's been so much progress. especially in cities like New York City. I'd say is probably a lot more diverse than the Bay Area in terms of, even if you look at unicorn outcomes of startups, there's a lot more that are run by female founders. There's a lot more that are run by underrepresented founders. It's testament to the city being more diverse, but we're definitely seeing a lot of progress. You know, we're happy with it, but we can't let our foot off the gas by any means.
If I can jump in, just as a founder dependent on VC funding to scale, I'm not going to knock that aspect of wealth creation at all. But I also want to recognize that, you know, a minute percentage, I don't know what the exact number is, but it's less than 5% of businesses that get founded by VC dollars. And if you think about it, if you have $10 million allocated, and, you know, we know from the statistics that, you know, the vast majority of startup companies are going to fail, right? If you're running a good portfolio and you have one major exit, you're doing well, right? 1 out of 10. So if you had that $10 million and instead allocated that $10 million to small businesses, the barbershops, the restaurants in communities of color that really, as we saw during PPP, don't need that much to either get started or to scale. You give a Black founder $10, that's the equivalent of $200 because we're used to doing way more with less. And it's the same for Black entrepreneurs on the ground level in these neighborhoods. They will do more with less. And I think that if we're talking about the wealth gap, right? This massive wealth gap where we hold 1/10 of the wealth of whites, you know, it has to be way more democratic. It has to be smaller dollar amounts. It has to be focused on increasing income and access to credit at the very basic level. And then we need to also focus on home ownership because we know that that is one of the biggest paths to wealth creation.
Yeah, and I think we also have to give minorities an opportunity to take risks, right? So if you have cash, then your kids can take risks and not worry about paychecks to pay for their bills. And that gives them opportunities to create businesses of value, right? And I think that's the fundamental structure has to be there too, right? Where we give entrepreneurs a chance. Lucy, you were saying?
Oh, no, I mean, around kids and the ability to kind of take risks or do things, you know, another way to start to get cash into people's hands is, again, through the tax code. So the National Academy of Engineering, Medicine, and Science released a report on how to cut the child poverty rate in half over the next decade. And the only solution that could do it on its own was by substantially increasing the child tax credit. So if every family, for every child, got a credit every year of $3,000, got an additional $1,000 for children under 6, that would cut the child poverty rate in half, which is not at all to say that all those families would be thriving. Our poverty rate is, you know, to be above the poverty rate, we may not actually make that much money. But that could make a substantial difference in families' ability to invest in children. Similarly, you know, there could be tax credits for things like childcare. You know, there are various experiments going around in the country on putting cash from governments into educational accounts for children. And the biggest experiment I know of is in Oklahoma, where they actually randomized families and put half of them make $1,000 in an account and for children. And not only did that decrease maternal pension rates, children at age 4 had higher developmental scores. So there could be real, even though they don't have access to the money, there's real impact in creating savings so that people have opportunity and this for the future.
Interesting. This is great, guys. Are there any other thoughts you guys have on what else we can do? And if someone wants to get in touch with you to get involved, like with the 100K pledge or microfinance or anything like that, any advice around that?
It's, you know, I don't know, one quick just comment is, it seems like this is real and like tangible, like what's happening right now, almost like as if it's kind of a perfect storm. A lot of folks are, you know, post-pandemic or at home. I think a lot of people want to be more active. There's this younger generation, by the way, during BLM, completely surprised me at their leadership in the streets and the protests that were so epic, by the way, in a pandemic, nonetheless. And so I really feel like this is different. You know, I feel this is much more different than, you know, Rodney King or Trayvon Martin. I feel like things are changing. And I think we just got to keep it up. I mean, just today, you probably saw a few hours ago, Tish James just filed a lawsuit to dissolve the NRA. You know, you saw the incredible Missouri primary, right, with Corey a couple of days ago. This is the moment. You know, it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned kind of, you know, the Black woman kind of being, you know, almost like the ultimate victim. I feel like you have Breonna Taylor on one side, but then you have Tish James on the other. And I feel like this is the moment for the Black woman. By the way, if Biden does not select a Black woman VP, I think he's completely tone deaf because you know, this is what's happening right now, and there's so much strength and leadership that's coming out of this community, from this movement. So anyway, I'm very positive. We have a lot of work to do, but
Yeah, definitely.
You know, voting and getting people, you know, wherever you live, getting people registered to vote, getting out the vote, figuring out how you can help people safely vote by mail. Like, that's probably the most important thing any of us can do right now for the next 3 months.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I say if you do one thing, vote at every level in your community. School board elections are extremely important, and those candidates are way more powerful in terms of their ability to dictate the future of Black and brown kids. And, you know, just in general, just for people to examine if there are things that they do in their everyday lives, you know, be conscious about their interactions with the economy around you, you know, what brands you support, what brands you do not support, where you shop, even something as simple as how much you tip.
No, absolutely. Yeah, and I think this younger generation realizes that wealth and power aren't finite, and so you can share it, and it doesn't mean that you're going to lose because you're giving someone else an opportunity. You know, and I think that's the thing that has really sort of helped shift some of the psyche around this.
Oh yeah, the younger generation, they're as always, they're going to save us. I mean, you saw it during the civil rights movement as well, with SNCC versus, you know, the older heads. And you're seeing it right now with, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement really pushing the envelope and bringing things up that were, you know, you couldn't speak about years ago. I think I'm very optimistic with those folks at the wheel.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys. This is amazing. Love that you guys came on, and this is awesome. Thank you so much.
Tell Kyle we said hello. We just saw him walk down the stairs.
All right.
Take care.
Thanks, guys. Nice to meet you.